Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for attending this opening event for the celebration of the founding of the town of Hampstead 275 years ago. I'm excited to see so many of you dressed for the occasion. Happy birthday, Hampstead. The first inhabitants arrived in this area, which is known as Timberlane, in the 1720s. The area was then part of Pentucket, later called Haverhill, Massachusetts. The North Parish of Haverhill Meeting House was located roughly 12 miles south of present-day Hampstead, and people were expected to travel those 12 miles to attend Sunday services. As you can imagine, this presented quite a hardship, as roads were just muddy paths and trails. In 1741, the boundary between Massachusetts and New Hampshire was established to be 3 miles from the Merrimack River and parallel thereto. This placed the settlement of Timberlane in the province of New Hampshire. A petition was presented to His Excellency Benning Wentworth to establish the town of Hampstead, and on January 19, 1749, their prayers were answered and the town was granted a charter. Julian Malcolm will now read the charter in a somewhat condensed version.
Hi, I'm Julian Malcolm, and I'm going to read the town charter, which I've cut down a little bit because it's very hard to read, so excuse me if I make a few mistakes. Province of New Hampshire. In the name of George II, by the grace of God, Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King Defender of the Faith. Whereas our loyal subjects, inhabitants of a tract of land within our province of New Hampshire, aforesaid lying partly within the part of our land in the province of New Hampshire called Haverhill District, have humbly petitioned and requested of us that they be erected and incorporated into a township and enfranchised with the same powers and privileges which other towns within said province by laws and have enjoyed, and appearing to us to be conducive to the general good of our said province, as well as the inhabitants, in particular by in particular by maintaining the good order and encouraging the culture of the land, and that the same should be done. Know ye, therefore, that we of our special grace, certain knowledge, and for the encouragement and promoting of the good purposes and ends aforesaid, by and with the advice of ye trusty and well-beloved Benning Wentworth, Esquire, our governor and commander-in-chief, and of our council of said province of New Hampshire, have erected and ordained, and by these presents for us our heirs and successors. So this part of the charter would have normally had where the boundaries were set. Most of the boundaries were based on where people's lands were currently at the time, and the only recognizable areas that you would know of possibly is a Angle Pond and Big Island Pond, which are the only geographical features that would still be around that they read in this charter. Presents are declared and ordained to be a town corporate and are hereby erected and incorporated into a body politic and a corporation to have continuance forever by the name of Hampstead, with all the powers, authorities, immunities, and enfranchises forever. Trees growing and being or that shall ever grow and be on said tract of land for the use of the Royal Navy, reserving also the power of dividing said town to us or heirs and successors when it shall appear necessary and convenient for the benefit of the inhabitants thereof. It is to be understood, and is accordingly hereby declared, that the private property of the soil is in no manner of way to be affected by this charter, and as the several towns within our province of New Hampshire are by the laws thereof established and authorized to assemble, and by the majority of votes to choose all such officers, and are mentioned in such laws. We do, by these presents nominate and appoint Daniel Little Esquire to call the first meeting of said inhabitants to be held within the said town at any time within 24 days from the date thereof, giving legal notice of the time, place, and design of holding such meetings, after which the annual meeting in the town shall be held for the choice of the town officers and forever on the last Wednesday in March annually. In testimony whereof we have caused and the seal of our province to be hereunto affixed. Witness Benning Wentworth Esquire, our governor and commander-in-chief of our province, the 19th day of January, in the year of our Lord Christ, 1749, and in the 23rd year of his reign, Benning Wentworth, by his excellency command with advice of counsel, Theodore Atkinson, Secretary, Province of New Hampshire. Entered and recorded in the Secretary Office in the Book of Charters, pages 52, 53, 54, per Theodore Atkinson, Secretary.
Thank you, Julian, for that reading. And now Audrey Stuck-Girard will perform a historic reenactment of a woman in colonial times.
Beginning at the southwest corner of Kimball's Land, near the Island Pond, and thence running by the easterly side of Moses Clement's land to his southwesterly bounds. From thence by the northerly side of Caleb Heath and John Dustin's land to the brook that runs from Emerson's Mill. And from thence by the northerly side of Captain George's Little's land and Thomas Little's land to the easterly corner bounds of said Thomas Little's land, which is in Clough's Meadow. And from thence running to the westerly corner of Thomas Hale's land, and by the north side of Hale's land to the northeast corner thereof. From thence to the southeast corner of Woodbridge's farm, so-called in Amesbury district, and then northeasterly by said Woodbridge's land to Peter Morse's corner, containing the same line until it intersects by Haverhill line, intersects a northwest line from Holt's Rocks in Angle Pond. From thence, northwest by Haverhill line to Joseph Stevens' northeast corner, thence north about 30 rods to the northeast corner of the farm of Samuel Graves, deceased, purchased from Kingston. From thence, west 17 degrees, north 1 mile and 27 rods to a stake and stone standing on the dividing line between Kingston and Londonderry. From thence, south 5 degrees and 15 west, about 106 rods to a great white oak tree marked with stones about it, which stands on the dividing lanes between Kingston and Derry, and thence running south on said dividing line 105 rods to the southwest corner of John Hogg's land, and from thence to the south and westerly side of Island Pond, thus including the island to the bounds first mentioned, and by these presents are declared and ordained to be a town corporate. So you all know exactly where we are now, right? Now, of course, this somewhat lengthy document, we expected to have such pomp, excitement. It's the charter of the town, the founding moment, and of course, reading it aloud, it is a legal document. And as a town that won't have a lawyer in residence for at least another 100 years, perhaps I ought to interpret some of life in 1749 to the rest of you here. Now, we are, as was mentioned before, on the native land of the Pennacook people. Now, these were the indigenous people who lived in this region before European settlement, their territory loosely being contained between the Connecticut River, Lake Winnipesaukee to the north, and then the Piscataqua River and the Merrimack River bordering the other sides. It's a loose confederacy of villages based with local regional representation. Now, the Pennacook lived in semi-permanent winter villages for the cold months, based in large communities, but in summer and warmer months would disperse out into smaller villages and summer hunting camps and such. They subsisted primarily on summer hunting, plenty of fishing. They would, rather ingenious, the rocky soil of New Hampshire, of course, makes it rather difficult to farm and establish a good large area for crops, and the Pennacook were quite adept at manipulating beavers to make the river wider, rivers and streams wider, clear out space for land and fields and such. They were tilling this soil and working this land well before European settlers arrived. In the winter, of course, they would harvest maple syrup from the maple trees, and the seasonal diet, fiddleheads in the spring, berries and nuts throughout the summer. And of course, their steady crops that they would grow would frequently be maize and squash in their cultivated fields. Not to mention the Pennacook were involved in an extensive network of trade up and down the East Coast, run primarily through the rivers and streams, rather than necessarily the coastal travel that Europeans would later have in North America. Now, of course, European settlement did come with some of the first explorers from Europe who came to the region of New England. They brought diseases with them. This was in the 1500s, well before the time of anyone settling in the area that would be known as Timberlane or Hampstead. Unfortunately, these diseases almost completely decimated the Pennacook people, taking out many of their numbers as they had no natural immunity to them. In their weakened state, they also fell victim to attacks from neighboring tribes and indigenous people, in particular the Abenaki in the north and the Mohawk to the northwest, which meant that by the time the first people from Europe were coming and settling in this area here, there really were not very many Pennacook living around, if at all. However, this is their land, and we should acknowledge that while this might be the anniversary of the first day of the town of Hampstead, it is not the anniversary of the first day of this region in general. Now, as was mentioned before, in 1640, some residents from the town of Newburyport purchased a tract of land referred to as Pentucket, for the place of the winding river. They purchased this from the Pennacook, and a year later in 1641 established the town of Haverhill, Massachusetts. From then we had over 100 years of relatively frequent raids, not just between the remaining Pennacook in the area, but the Abenaki, the Mohawk, all of the tribes throughout the area. Now this was because, of course, we were encroaching on their lands. There are many bad dealings, and European nations also began to use the colonized areas in North America as a second venue for their wars in Europe, meaning that by 1749, we have had a number of French and Indian wars, as we might refer to. You might be thinking, if you know your history off the top of your head, the French and Indian War had not happened at the time of the founding of Hampstead. That was, in fact, the fourth French and Indian War. We have, at this point, just concluded last fall King George's War. During this, many of the men of the area that would be involved, become known as Hampstead, were involved in the militia and military and traveled extensively during this. Now, again, as was mentioned in the brief history of town, 70 years ago in 1769, the province of New Hampshire was granted a charter by King Charles II. Since 1691, we've been operating under our second and current charter. Now, again, the borderline of the province of New Hampshire versus the province of Massachusetts, where exactly that should be, has been in contest for pretty much ever since the charter was written. Back and forth until 8 years ago, 1741, one of the coldest winters that anybody can remember. The people who live along the Merrimack state that it froze at least 2.5 feet thick, even in its densest, swiftest parts this winter. In any case, in 1741, King George II declares that the boundary between the two provinces will be 3 miles north of the Merrimack River from Newburyport in the east to Lowell in the west, where the river turns north into New Hampshire, which of course leaves us north of the border and no longer a part of Haverhill. Most of what will become the town of Hampstead is known as the Timber Lane district, particularly for the forestry, a great number of old growth forests here, and plenty of rocky soil. It was not very well founded by extensive agriculture, but there were a few homesteaders in the area. Now, not all of the area that would become Hampstead was Timber Lane. There was also Amesbury Peak, the region which is now East Hampstead, which was claimed by both Amesbury and Kingston, and again, it's got into a little difficulty exactly where town lines would be, and decades down the line there would be a settlement paid to Kingston. Now, there's also Haverhill Peak in West Hampstead. Now, that's right along the western border of the town. Now, when the Haverhill started granting land to people to settle in this Timber Lane district in the area that would be the northern stretches of Haverhill, there were some Irish settlers already in the area. They had come over from Londonderry and started settling in Haverhill when had already been there for several years by the time some of the first Haverhill settlers reached the area in the 1720s. Now, the very northwest tip of Hampstead was land granted to a man named Samuel Graves, who had been deceased, and it was purchased from the town of Kingston in 1730 because they wanted to join this area that was known as Timber Lane, incorporate as such. I will point out, if you are hearing these town names and places and thinking to yourself, Kingston and Derry do not touch, there are several towns in between those areas. You are not incorrect. The geography of New Hampshire, of course, while the land remains the same, the town borderlines have changed extensively. And much as New Hampshire was founded in 1740, much as Hampstead was founded in 1749, surrounding communities like Plastow, Atkinson, Sandown, all broke apart from some of the larger towns which held claims over them, like Amesbury and Salisbury, Kingston, and Londonderry. Now, Hampstead's founding, shall I get to it? By the late 1720s, there were a few families living in the Timber Lane district. The Ford, Heath, and Emerson families, noted in particular. As was mentioned before, the North Parish in Haverhill, about 12 miles away, was an extraordinarily long distance to travel every single Sunday. But we are a people of devout faith who believe that regular worship in God, attendance at meetings, and a public viewing of our dedication to our Lord and to our religion is pivotal to life. And so we do make the trek frequently, as often as we can. But of course, it's New England, and winter happens. There's snow, there's difficulty, and so having a closer meeting house would be such a boon to the families who are living in this region. So in 1733, which was just 16 years ago, the people in this area petitioned the North Parish in Haverhill to create just a small local log cabin for more regional worship. And about 25 families began establishing in the area. Now, just 4 years ago, in 1745, we began work on a new, larger church, which you may know as the Old Meeting House. The work continued so that we could expand, grow ourselves larger, and already at this time having in mind that this region might incorporate into a town of our own, already beginning as soon as 1746 to begin to send petitions to the governor. Now, a charter was finally signed by Governor Wentworth on January 19 of 1749. You may wonder what life was like in these first years of the town, or perhaps who I am as I stand in front of you speaking. You might call me Mrs. Morse or Mrs. Little, Mrs. Plummer or Beard or Bailey. And unfortunately, for many of these women who were real women, we don't know their first names. We don't know the exact details of their lives. They were viewed rather as extensions of their family. The husband of the household, the father being the head of the family, women operating within the private domestic sphere, but supporting the same entity, that the family should be one when viewed by the community. The father is the public face, the mother keeps everything moving in the background. Now, life for the average person in Hampstead in 1749 is one of a yeoman farmer. Many of these people are very subsistence farmers, working class and trying to eke a living out of the soil as best they can. To give you an idea of what a subsistence farm looks like in this time, to create something that's going to sustain a family, now this can be an extended family, but sustain a farm in the long term, you're going to need about 60 acres of land in total. Now, about 2 to 4 of these are going to be for your house and your kitchen garden and a small orchard around the house. You're going to need an additional 20 to 30 acres for a wood lot, because the average household burns through about an acre of wood a year. And so you need to replant those trees, keep them going, rotate the fields, and maintain that way. We've got a little bit of an ease here in Timber Lane because there is so much old growth forest, but before too long that will be cut down. We'll need to begin to maintain those forests to maintain a growing population. Now, you will also need about 6 acres for tillage, for grains for bread or flax or linen. Now, that's also going to be used, there's an additional 15 acres used for grazing your cattle and your livestock during the warmer months. And then you're also going to need to feed the ones you're overwintering. So you need to keep another 15 acres or so for haying. All of that in total equaling quite a large parcel of land, about 60 acres to sustain. It's not just your house and your kitchen garden. Now, life in 1749 in New England is largely seasonally guided. Winter is time notably of slaughter, when you don't want to bring your animals overwintering them, feeding them through the cold months, and you want to have some sausages and bacon and smoked meats preserved. You spend the months of November, December, and January making those sausages. You'll also spend the spring plowing and tilling the fields, carting manure and ashes from the household. Late spring, women are engaged in extensive cheese making, using all of that dairy and turning it into something that can last a little bit longer, hold us through many more months and into the winter once more. Late summer brings the haying in the fields, during which many of the members of the family, women included, and all of the children, any able-bodied people, will help to bring in hay from the fields in the summer. Late summer and into autumn, you have the harvest of the larger crops, your squash and your grains, and you begin the efforts of your preservations of foods to keep them into the colder months. So your canning, your salting, your jarring, drying, and everything to help keep you through until you start to have some of those first green sprouts of the next spring. Now, for women, while we are unnamed in much of the public record, we are certainly here, and the visibility of what we've contributed is extraordinarily apparent. Not only can households not run if you don't have someone procuring food, feeding, sustaining, raising children, being responsible for the early education of children, also things, simple task of laundry, which you might think, oh, silly, pish-posh, women's work, whatever. Laundry is the source of good hygiene in the 18th century. If you are not regularly cleaning your clothes, you are living in a slovenly manner, not only inviting ill health into your house, but also you are showing to the world that you are living in an unclean manner and are viewed negatively by society. So keeping your garments clean, keeping your underlayers fresh is a way to maintain good health for yourself, for your family, and for your community. And good health is one of the most important things we strive for as well, and something that can be taken from us all too quickly. Medicine in 1749 is fairly lacking, even when there is a physician present. Most of the time, all we can do is hope to ease symptoms, bring someone comfort, and hope that their own body might be strong enough to recover from whatever illness on their own. Disease is rampant in the area. Just 14 years ago, of course, something everybody will remember, there was a rampant throat distemper in 1735 that ripped through New England, killing hundreds or thousands. Now this is classified these days as diphtheria, which affects mostly children. And so entire populations of children in towns were wiped out just a decade and a half ago. This is very fresh on all of our minds. And of course, that's certainly not the only ending point. In just a few years' time, in 1756, a malignant fever will sweep through the town and kill 30 in Hampstead alone. This is something we deal with regularly, unfortunately cannot be avoided, and as such, the large number of children we bear, unfortunately many of them will not survive. There is a high infant and child mortality rate, and families are intended to be grown large, to have as many children as possible, to produce for the world, to be good Christians, stewards of the earth, and bring God's community and light into the world, and also because children are wonderful and fun, and also because unfortunately so many are lost. And so an attempt to just keep trying to grow your family is very firm in the hearts of many of these people. Now, in the years following the signing of the charter and the establishing of Hampstead, we continue to build our congregational church. The new meeting house is finished in 1752, and the first minister, Reverend Henry True, is elected and holds the seat until his death in 1782. A very well-beloved minister, extremely, very, very involved in the town. Mr. True's writings are some of the records we have of early Hampstead history. Now, of course, it's not too long until we do get to some more of those European and North American conflicts. The French and Indian War breaks out in just a few years' time. In 1755, the New Hampshire Provincial Army begins recruiting for the war against the French. 33 men, including Reverend True as chaplain, join the militias and join the French and Indian War during the span of the years of the war. And these men, of course, while fighting and witnessing battle, also get to experience travel out of this region for the first time in their lives, going to regions as far as Nova Scotia or Fort Ticonderoga, bringing back stories of survivors and expanding the global idea of who we are as people of Hampstead, of New Hampshire, and these beginning to be viewed as an American set of American colonies. Now, I will bring this to close because I can tell I've gone on for some time, and I've brought you up about to the end of the French and Indian War. Now, I will point out that in 1749, in this winter, the children born this month will be 26 years old the day that the first shots of the American Revolution are fired. They will be in the prime of their lives. Many of the young men of Hampstead and the surrounding areas will join militias and join the Continental Army during the fight for American independence. Again, fighting for themselves on a local level, but also establishing a national identity, bringing you perhaps into a slightly more recognizable period of American history, something you might remember a few bits and pieces of here and there. A beginning story once again, but just as the signing of the charter in Hampstead is not the beginning of the story of this town, the American Revolution is certainly not the very beginning of our story in the end. And thank you for your time. I would like to see if anybody has any questions. I know I talked for some time. I might be able to take one or two. Does anybody have off the top of their head anything they'd like clarified or spoken on further? Wonderful. Well, now you're all experts, and I'm sure you're going to go take the surveying boundary lines, go plot out the outside of New Hampshire, tell me where all of the town lines are different, the towns that didn't exist in 1749. But of course, it's late and it's chilly, January evening. I believe there is plenty more festivities, some good food, some warm talk, some chatter, and celebration of the town to follow. So thank you all very much for your time. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for that great presentation, and I'd like to thank you all for attending. We're going to be proceeding down to the dinner. Those of us that are going to have the dinner, the easiest way is probably through this door. It's a little icy out there, so you want to be careful with the ice. The dance is going to be starting at 7:30. If anybody is not going to the dinner and would like to go to the dance, it's going to be at the middle school, and that's going to start at 7:30. And also, the church has got a little setup down in the church library. If anybody would like to stick their heads in there, they've got some historical information in there that might be worth checking out. So that concludes the service up here, and we'll see most of you down at dinner. Thank you.